I think before we start, the sentiment from both of us, it's good to be home, it's great to be in Calcutta. So thank you for inviting us. Agree?
Couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Okay, I think you guys know a lot about Roni because he's featured in the media so much, but even so, for those of you who don't, he's a Calcutta boy who went to America, who had no godfathers, nothing, who made it on his own. And you have had people who go abroad and open a restaurant or whatever. But what he's done is truly remarkable because he's opened not just one, but several restaurants in the most competitive market in the world, New York. He's not opened, say, 4 branches of the same restaurant. They're all different restaurants with different concepts. And I've been watching over the last few years he's opened. There's not been one dud. Each of them has been a huge, huge success. And he has been asked about this later. He has broken out of that ethnic ghetto in which Indian restaurants are always placed. The Maka, which is probably his most celebrated restaurant, is one of the top restaurants in New York across cuisines. Nobody sees it as an Indian restaurant or an ethnic restaurant. You have to just read what the New York Times says about it to realize, in a sense, how far Indian cuisine has come, thanks to people like Roni and his chef Chintan. He's also got a South Indian restaurant, which is just one of his restaurants, or Sema, so we'll talk about that. But before we talk about the Indian food scene, I want to ask a bit about his own life. Tell me how you started in Calcutta.
Hello, everyone. It seems like a quiet evening. Is
It's a sedate crowd, but they're warm.
What is happening? This is not the Calcutta I know. I know the hustle, the bustle. I was taking the bus and the trams. I mean, come on. So, all right. The Calcutta that I know and where I come from. A quick introduction before that. That's my father, Mr. Mazumdar, my wife, and that's my father-in-law. So I know he was very kind to mention that, there's without any godfather, but I have some serious fathers who are supporting me for it. My life in Calcutta was as plain Jane as anybody can imagine. I come from a simple middle-class family. I think the idea of even owning restaurants never crossed my mind because it didn't make sense. For many of us, going out to a restaurant was a big deal. And the purpose of this evening is let's have a real open conversation. And I think I'm going to share who I am and whatever we've done or what we have succeeded or failed in. And I think in many ways, whenever we hear about these stories and certain successes, I feel it's always associated with somebody who's this hero-like figure. I'm anything but that. I come from the most basic, humble background in North Calcutta by Shiti. That's where I grew up. I left this country in 1996. And it was mom and dad who immigrated to the United States. Wasn't there a very specific plan to say that let's go create restaurants? And I did what every immigrant boy does. I studied engineering and then went on to work in the Fortune 500s. And finally, when my father was retiring, that was a turning point, which led me to think about that. What would keep him busy? What would a person, in many ways, my journey didn't really begin with me. My journey began as a son, thinking of what would keep my dad busy and how he might find his sense of livelihood, which eventually led me to understand how the food world has been broken for so long, how Indian food is relegated to the sidelines, and fast forward, here we are.
So why restaurants? What made you do it?
Sure. So taking a step back, my father, just like I think many families here, he's obsessed on feeding people. That's what I've grown up seeing. I've seen him meet people on a train and invite them home and said to my mom, at 1 a.m, telling my mom, like, oh my God, so-and-so is here. She's like, but who is this person? And why is he here? Let's feed him a meal. And it sounded absurd. But I think my father, in many ways, resembles many of our fathers, mothers, etc., because that's just the kind of culture we are. And somewhere that doesn't get replicated into a formal restaurant setting. So I thought, how crazy would it be to maybe open up a little space where he got to do this every single day? And he did. It was in 2011. It was a very small restaurant. There were no accolades, there was no media, nothing. It was just a really small place for my father and I that we started and thought, let's see where this goes. And honestly, with all due respect, it was him who spent 7 days a week making sure that that little place, without any real return, kind of starts to work, starts to hum. And in a place like New York, we struggled. We had our challenges. It was money out of our credit cards to make sure that we can go and open and keep the place going. There were many challenging days. It wasn't, my journey never started in this glamorous, glorious way. It started with really making sure somewhere Indian food and maybe my father has a voice. But in the process of helping my father find his dream, I think I ended up finding my own. That's when I realized that, why is it that every time we talk about Indian food in America, it's so considered so exotic? Why is it? What the heck is going on? 1/8 of the planet is eating Indian food, but somehow when someone from outside looks at our culture, oh my God, so spicy. Oh my God, so, all these factors, and it just kills me. When did something else become the normal and we became the abnormal? And I think all of these questions were going through my head, and that's when I, teamed up with Chef Chintan, and together we started this journey in 2017.
So your first restaurant you opened when? Which 2011?
It was in 2011, a place called The Masala Wala. It had the word "the" for a couple of reasons. One, because only masalawala.com was taken. Since then, I did purchase masalawala.com, which I own. That's a different problem. But there was also a famous Bengali writer which had 2 D's in front of their name. So I thought maybe go with the Bengali writer. I put the.
And that was successful, or did you lose money on it?
It's about how we define success. If I look at that very first venture as something that gave my father a sense of livelihood, then it's the biggest success we've ever had. Because I think it took somebody who was like me or any of us, I think in many ways, fairly unknown and started working, but he built a sense of community. To me, a restaurant is very much a fabric of every community. And I think Indian restaurants are no different. We don't have to look at it, oh, it's in America or in London or in China. It doesn't matter. I think we also belong there. That's why we're there. And I think my father created a sense of home where people from all different backgrounds, including the Prime Minister of Malta, came to visit, not because it was the most well-known restaurant, but people started talking about, oh, there's this man, and he treats you in the most amazing way. I think you should go there. And after a UN convention, all these black cars pull up, and the Prime Minister gets out, and we're thinking, what is he doing here? It doesn't make any sense. Today it feels different, it feels normal, but that wasn't the case. So, yes, in my opinion, I think it was.
Okay. So 2011 is the first one. The next one comes when?
2017.
Okay. And that's after you met Chintan or before?
That's right around the time.
So tell us about your meeting with Chintan and how you began this journey together.
So, Chef Chintan Pandya, he's a chef. I want to clarify, I'm not the chef. I'm the business side of the operations. I had a broad vision for what I wished to do. And I realized that I needed a partner in crime. It wasn't something where I would just hire a chef and it's just going to work itself out. I wanted to work with a real partner. And it's a very interesting journey because the first time I met Chintan, I said, let's sit down, let's talk about economics. He said, why are we talking about money if you haven't tried my food? I said, that's interesting, sure. He said, let me cook. He took the next 3 days, created a 16-course meal, and by the 3rd course, I'm like, I have to be the biggest idiot in the world to not work with this guy. He's insane. And the person who introduced us told me one problem with Chintan. They said, this guy is probably one of the most talented chefs I know. There's one problem, no one knows him. So I think somewhere we solved that problem 5 years ago.
More than solved it. You remember what he made for that first meal?
Oh yeah, there was a Parsi dish. It was a whole tasting menu that he did. And there's a dish, patata parida.
Yeah. And it's fried eggs on top of potatoes.
Yeah, it's probably one of the simplest dishes we can have, and he created his own version of it. And I was blown away. And I remember that dish so much. I'm like, what the heck? Why am I trying the rest of the dishes? I mean, he's a very different person today than what he was. very few words, and now he doesn't shut up, so it's a very different world. But I don't think I would be anything if it wasn't for this kind of a partnership and a collective effort. So, look, the truth is, yes, we didn't have anybody that was pulling us up. It was just a few of us trying to make it happen in New York. But I think each of us gave our 3,000%. And be it my father, my wife, through all the uncertain times when none of it made any sense, when it all seemed like some stupid ideas, like why the heck would you leave a perfectly normal job, put the entire family on this, crazy journey, and then my father-in-law, who's also our CFO, so yeah.
So what was the first restaurant you and Chintan opened together?
We opened a restaurant called Rahi. It was modern Indian, and it was different. It was different because it's something that we were excited by. And New Yorkers, business-wise, Rahi ended up becoming Sema, which is a Southern Indian restaurant now. And when we were closing Rahi, everyone thinks that you close a restaurant because it's not doing well. Truth is, Rahi was the highest revenue-generating restaurant we ever opened. Till date. That includes every restaurant that we have. That was Rahi, and people thought, the staff to the community thought we were idiots. We were, again, fools to go out there and close a restaurant that's doing really well. But that had to go back into the reason I wear this t-shirt.
Which is? Unapologetic. No, forget about the apology, but give us a reason why you do it.
Why?
Why would you close a successful restaurant? I mean, it's another matter that you open an even more successful restaurant on that spot, but why close the restaurant?
And I didn't know it would become more successful or not. Truth is, after Rahi opened, we opened a very small place called Adda Indian Canteen. It is everything that you believe a restaurant shouldn't be. I really mean this.
Explain that.
Okay. You just show up. There's no bars. You bring your own alcohol. It is like dhaba on steroids. It is literally, there would be lines around the block where people would bring in their own coolers, like as if they're going to a game. And they would just sit outside for like 3, 4, 5 hours just to get a seat at this table. It was 30 seats. It was done in probably with negative budget at some point. I don't know how we pulled this off. It was the tiniest restaurant that we've ever opened, but it wasn't the size of it. I think for the first time, something changed. Which was, for Chintan and I, it was an awakening to see that no longer are we going to cook for others, we're going to cook what we want to. And I think it's a very important moment in the very genesis of who we are today. I think no matter what we do, be it food, be it media, be it anything creative, we're always thinking of that customer. We're always worried how someone else will judge us. Therefore, we create something that we think other people will end up liking. What we have seen, our biggest success has come from a moment where we said, it doesn't matter. I just want to express myself the way I am. And if people hate it, that's okay. It doesn't matter. And I think that's a very important lesson that we're carrying forward. And somewhere in Rahi, we didn't start like that. Truth for closing Rahi was that Rahi was still worried about what would the customer like. And then therefore, business-wise, it was connecting. But that's not the life we wanted to live. We felt that if these restaurants weren't just money-making machines. Truth is, if you just want to make a lot of money, then don't do restaurants.
Yeah.
Right? So if that's not the criteria, then what was it? I think somewhere our vision was, we wanted to feel liberated. It's two guys that were in their 30s. I just turned 40, so game over. Two guys in their 30s, and we just wanted to feel that we do things the way we want to. And we don't care. We don't want to listen to anybody. We don't care for what rules the world has set. We're just going to go out and do it. And for that to work, for people to line up for months and months and months, I think it was the biggest turning point in my life. Not from a career standpoint. There was something that I learned that while this was happening, is that I think too many of us change ourselves, bend ourselves to be somebody else because it fits someone else's expectations. And I don't think we need to do that. And I think when we stopped, something else happened. New Yorkers, people around the United States started showing up in a way that they have never shown up to Indian restaurants before. We've always gone to an Indian restaurant, dined, but never have we seen a wait list of 1,500 people every day. That happened because somewhere we connected this food in a completely different way. It was never about just the food, but it was a conversation and it was a moment of empowerment for our community. Gone are the days where we needed to prove ourselves and said, I need to make this plate look American or Eurocentric, whatnot. We said, screw all of that. We're going to do it the way it is. If it has oil on top, if the meat has bone on it, deal with it. I don't care. We're literally serving ilish mach, hilsa, in our latest restaurant, and we're not deboning it. I don't give a damn if I have to debone it. The question is, whenever somebody wants to look at a culture, they're always looking for us to change ourselves. Which Italian restaurant has come to you and said, I don't understand, I don't know what happens in India, but I'm talking in the United States. Which Italian, which French restaurant have asked you, I'm going to make it extra spicy? Which sushi restaurant have said, don't worry about it, I'm going to make it as spicy as you want? No one does it. We are the people that have been doing it for this long.
Yeah. We've been apologizing in a way for our food almost when we serve it to Westerners.
I think it has a lot to do with our colonial past. I call it the immigrant shackles. It's just the truth of it. I've dealt with it myself. I wasn't born unapologetic. I was born very apologetic. And really not knowing. I told my mom not to make certain fish curries when my friends would visit because I found it embarrassing. And I think in America, many kids feel the same way. Mom, don't do this. It's not that they don't. When I went away to college, don't send certain dishes over there. It's going to look weird. But what is this idea? What is this idea that we keep saying? This is weird. This is wrong. This is not right. When did that happen? That only meant that somewhere we chose to put ourselves on the sidelines. And I think it's really in a moment like 2022. There's no better time to make that change.
Part of the immigrant experience for most communities, when you go to a new country, you try very hard to fit in. And as part of fitting in, you end up apologizing in a way for who you are, trying to soften the rough edges, trying to hide what you think people won't like. There must have been a moment when you said, screw this, I'm going to be what I am. Do you remember how that happened, when it happened?
When it happened was a disagreement between Chintan and I. And I think for the next 2 or 3 days, we only exchanged a few words because when we were working on Adda Indian Canteen, Chintan created a menu. I looked at the menu, I said, this is the biggest disaster we're about to open. It doesn't, it's not that, there's been no big financial backer, it's just us, right? So I felt, my God, if this business doesn't work out, it's going to be a really terrible situation for all of us. Yes, there's Rahi, but you don't want a business that you're start from negatives. So I went to him, I said, Chintan, this is ludicrous. I don't think this should be the menu. He said, that's the menu. I said, no man, it's just, no one will show up because the menu had things like, you are putting goat brains on the menu, like no one would have dared. The word goat itself already scares people.
Yeah.
Then you want to put bheja fry on the menu and you think that's completely normal. There's paneer khurchan, there's all these kinds of stuff. And I said, how would we convince people that this place is actually different than what they have believed all these quintessential Indian restaurants to be? And there's a whole different problem America has had in terms of Indian food. We have put a whole lot of heavy cream in our Indian cooking. And somewhere trying to find that bridge, and here comes this food that's ruthless. I tried the dishes, they're delicious, but I would never dare to put it on a restaurant. I would just eat it at home secretly because it's our guilty pleasure. And he said, that's the menu. And then 3 days later, I woke up and I said, if this is the person that I have partnered with to have that sense of creativity, why am I, at a moment when he feels this strongly, why am I clipping his wings? What kind of a partner am I? And I realized I was wrong. I realized that if anybody who's creative, and I believe anyone in this room, well, if you're Bengali, you're creative. So that's it.
That's a given, yeah.
Yeah, we're creative. We don't make money. That's a whole different topic.
Well, I think you probably proved that wrong.
Whatever money we're making, we still choose an industry where you cannot make much money. I think whenever you have this creative endeavor, it's important that there's a clear voice and a clear perspective that you have for it. And I don't think there's an amazing product that can ever be created if that voice is unclear within you. So what I understood is if this is the creative soul and he has this voice, why am I suppressing it? That's not right. And I don't think it's about cooking Bheja fry. It's about however one chooses to express themselves creatively and really hearing that voice as loudly as possible. And that's what happened at Adda. And to my surprise, first week was kind of lukewarm. I'm like, oh my God. Chintan and I are standing outside and talking. I'm like, Chintan, are you sure this is going to work out? And he's like, if it doesn't in 3 months, we'll change it. What the heck? And here we are.
That was really, correct me if I'm wrong, your breakthrough. That's when I heard about you, everybody wrote about you, you got rave reviews. What did that do to you as a group, as a person, to be so praised from being anonymous before that largely? And being praised in what? As I said, the most competitive market in the world. You are cooking food that you're being unapologetic about, and you've pulled it off. Everybody's raving about it. How did that feel?
It felt like it was a fleeting moment. It felt that this is not real. This is going to last 3 months, 6 months, and we're going to go back to how Indian restaurants have always been. Just a moment that's passing. The lines would be there. I would be inside looking out thinking, well, that line's going to go away at some point, so we should get back to whatever we need to do. But the lines never stopped. The lines only grew, and I think that was the learning. That somewhere, when a product or an idea, I think we're not just creating restaurants, we're really out there creating a whole new set of ideals when it comes down to how we look at food. When that strikes, when that connects, I think there's a whole different force that comes into play. What it did, it humbled us a lot more. What Chintan and I never talked about it because we never considered that a success, to be honest with you. Every restaurant we build, we go back and we're like, well, if this can be 2% of what Adda was, I think we'll be okay. That's always been the point of reference. We recently stopped saying that. We recently all right, we have a few different, points, but it never felt real. I think I still, right now, there are moments I would go home and it's 1 a.m. We're very hands-on in what we do. And I would be almost in shock driving alone home thinking, are people in New York actually coming, ordering luchi and kosha mangsho and paying money for it? And there's a line and this is the hottest restaurant to get in? It's not real. Maybe I have to wake up from it. So, no, it still doesn't feel real.
Yeah. What happens next? You're now, for the audience, you'll be modest to say this, a phenomenon. They're written about in the New York Times regularly. People make pilgrimages to wait for tables here. They're serving food that has never been served before in New York, certainly. In many ways, you've changed the paradigm for Indian restaurants in America. You're beginning to change the way in which Indian food is viewed. What do you do next?
Keep building, keep empowering. Look at the next generation. Look at how this doesn't become an idea that is just stuck with us. I think the idea of being unapologetic is a universal message. When people from other cultures, a Vietnamese chef comes to our doorstep and says that because of what you're cooking, I feel like I can cook my real food, that's empowering. That's so real. That makes you feel alive and gives you a sense of purpose that you've never found before. So I think the only thing you can do is keep going and be true to whatever it is that you're setting your ideals for. And make sure that there's a certain level of inspiration that happens to the next generation. Guys, truth is, most Indian chefs in America are at all excited to cook Indian food. It's just the truth. You need to look at the statistics. It's very difficult to hire exciting Indian chefs because chefs of Indian origin would feel better saying, I work in a French restaurant, I work in an Italian restaurant, because it makes us somewhere feel superior to say those words. It still makes us feel superior to say, I've used burrata on this dish rather than paneer, when no one else outside of our culture is actually using paneer in their cuisine. And even if they are, they're not feeling elevated and like, oh my God, I've changed the world for it. I think these are the moments, and I think it's an idea, it's a moment for this entire generation where it's not just about food, but really owning who we are. How can we carry that message forward? When are we going to stop trying to be like someone else? Because we have an incredible history and an heritage that I just think goes unexplored. Ask yourself a simple question. How many people here, I actually want to see, raise your hand if you know this, how many people here are deeply familiar with Meghalayan food? 3 people. 3 people. I didn't raise my hand. I'm in the food business. How many people are familiar with the foods from Bihar, Orissa? You start looking, this is in our backyard, yet we never actually explore them while we are obsessed on exploring and telling everybody, have you tried the next pasta? Oh, it's this new thing that's happening in Italy. Why? Because somewhere it makes us feel goddamn superior. It makes us believe that we have moved upward in the world because I'm using the word foreign. And I think I remember when my aunt, who lived in America, who used to buy a perfume, and my family members would say, oh man, that's a foreign, whatever, foreign perfume, it's better. This idea is still buried in our heads that I would like for us to dismantle in the next decade if possible, which is, it doesn't have to be foreign to be better. We are just as good, we're just as worthy, and I think it cannot be just with me. I think it's from every single person in this room. That's the message.
The marka is, or you've already changed the paradigm, is the restaurant that sets New York on fire. Tell us how that happened.
I think it took the idea of Adda and doubled down, tripled down on this. Adda did food that I look back now and still find safe, which is ridiculous in many ways. Dhamaka said, oh, you think goat brains, geja fry is out there. Let me give you dokle from Meghalaya, chana pora from Orissa. Let me give you gurta kapura. Do you understand how many people, when it started, people would literally show up and say, you're putting goat testicles on the menu and you expect people to actually buy it. It's so much sold that we don't have enough of it to sell every single night, so we have to ration it. I think we all have a misconception about who the rest of the world is, because we look at the rest of the world through our own lens. And it's my learning, being in New York, it's not the white guy that's showing up, the black, the Hispanic. These guys are showing up and they're excited to try something new, try something that's bold. We sit at home and have this narrative in our head saying, oh my God, these people, they can't handle this. Let me tone it down. Bullshit. That's just the truth. People actually are showing up to say, give me what's real. And I think maybe it is a generational shift where we're seeing that give me what's real for any single culture. Don't tone it down. Don't change it just for me. I want to know who you are. And I think we are intimately getting to know each other through this lens of food. And that's been the vehicle that has brought our communities together.
Do you think part of the problem in India is that restaurant food in India has traditionally been food that nobody makes at home? No Punjabi makes tandoori chicken at home because he doesn't have a tandoor. Therefore, he doesn't make butter chicken. When we go out, we look for a certain kind of heavy menu comprised of restaurant dishes that nobody's ever eaten in their houses. And we somehow don't realize that making good food that people eat in their homes can be wonderful.
Without a doubt. You know that saying everybody has where we say, why should I go out and pay for something if I can make it at home? We all say it. This is nothing. My aunt makes it. Why the hell am I going out? Let me go out and they say it. But what we miss in the process, yes, your aunt makes it, but a generation later, that recipe is lost. Your aunt might have made it, my aunt doesn't anymore. And so what happens to me? And there's many of me out there. And slowly but surely, you start to lose context of what created the very essence of our cuisine. And I think it's a disservice to ourselves each time we create that separation. Do you realize how much of, when we talk about French cuisine, and the French have done tremendous, full kudos to them in terms of taking, look at the size of France, look at the size of India, look at the diversity of France, look at the diversity of India. Yet, every term in a kitchen is French. The Michelin guide that we talk about also French. They're deciding who's good, who's bad. So the lens of food and how we're looking at ourselves is from a very small part of the world. And that has gone on to now go to Europe. And now our obsession with Europe comes in. And then we take that and translate that onto Indian food. That's what I meant when I said about 10 years ago, I realized how broken the system is. And we're so broken that we don't even realize that it's broken. And I think that's the most important factor, is to first recognize that a change is required, is to first recognize that a shift is needed, right? And I think until or unless we bridge that gap, start to value what our moms, what our families, what our aunts, or what someone in our house who used to work and still made an amazing dish, how valuable that was. Today, right now, we still value a 5-star hotel over a person that's selling the food on the street. Ask yourself why. Truth is, the guy who's making fuchka on the street might make it 10 times better than the guy in a 5-star hotel. We will never give that man that value. We will say it, oh, I love it. But in our mind, we're never going to elevate him or her to the level to actually give him the respect that they demand. And I think that's what's really upside down, because economics have played a huge role in terms of how we see food. So, home to the restaurant, yes. And I think we need to stop looking at food through the lens of money as well.
Explain that. When you say looking at food, you mean don't take the line that because it's expensive and it's served in luxurious surroundings, the food is better. Is that?
No, so I look at it in a few ways, right? So if you look at India, I asked about Meghalaya earlier. You recognize why a lot of us don't know about Meghalayan food, the economics of that state. Bihar, Orissa, you're going to start seeing a very interesting pattern. But you know about Kerala a little bit more, not much. And I think it's almost sad that how much of a surface level knowledge we as Indians have, you might know it, I don't. And I also represent a huge part of the population that exists around the world. When I tell my friends we're opening a South Indian restaurant, the reaction is, idli dosa, I know. Where is the goat intestine? Where are the snails? The reason snails are on the Sema menu is because Chef Vijay Kumar comes from a farmer's family. How many farmers are in India? How many of their lives do we actually pierce into and ask ourselves, do I know his food? We don't. That's what I mean by economics. Each and every time we have looked at food, it's been either the economic power of a state, been the status quo of the individual eating it. Vijay's life story was where he used to forage for snails in his rice paddies, and his grandma used to cook them. But he was ashamed of it because people in his school would figure out that he's eating snails and would make fun of him. Then he goes to work at Taj and figures out there's a thing called escargot that every Indian kid is jumping around for. France, India, economics, escargot, and you have your snails. It's a story of God knows how many centuries. And I think this is how we need to upend that.
Let's talk a little bit about how immigrant communities abroad have often missed the opportunity. The vast majority of Indian restaurants in the West and 100% in the UK are still owned by Bengalis. They're Bangladeshis, so we don't see it as they're Bengalis. The whole foundation of the curry empire in the UK was done by then East Pakistanis, now Bangladeshis, basically Bengalis. Yet not one of them will ever serve a Bengali dish. They're all sort of made up dishes like so-called vindaloos that nobody in Goa would recognize, patiyas that no Parsi would recognize. Why? Why did we miss these opportunities?
I think when you have dire circumstances, let me preface this by saying, no one gets an MBA in America and says, I want to open a group of restaurants. Doesn't happen. Indian restaurants. No one. I don't know what decision I was thinking. I don't have an MBA, maybe that's why. No one actually goes to school. And those who are learning culinary arts are not trying to cook Indian food. So ask yourself, if no one's aspiring for it, and the people who have aspired for it are not cooking it, then who's cooking Indian food? It's somewhere circumstances have led to that destination. Today, if you look at the Bangladeshi population, the handful of Indian restaurants, those who were trying to say that I will open XYZ place, Bangladeshi employees were cheaper at that time, more accessible. Because a lot of the Indian population in America went for accounting, engineering, medicine, and not willing to work in restaurants other than servers. So in the kitchens, it became the Bangladeshi population. Slowly but surely, they made enough money to say, let me go out there and replicate what I saw, because somewhere that works. And you know the truth? The truth is, it's the very same reason why during Masala Wala days, I was serving chicken tikka masala. Because of the circumstances. The truth is, if no one showed up to this restaurant and I tried to be this bold, crazy person, and the restaurant tanked, I wouldn't survive to tell the story. So circumstances in many ways have led these people to repeat the same problems rather than reinventing it, because reinventing comes with a cost and a sacrifice that they might never survive to tell. Maybe because I worked in the Fortune 500s, there was a little bit of a nest egg, there was a little bit of something somewhere to fall back on. We were willing to take that chance. And also, you had someone like a Chintan who got added to the mix who said, no, I think we can do this. All of those factors played a role. And most chefs, Indian chefs, not even abroad, within Asia, would rather cook Indian food with molecular gastronomy than cook our real food. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with anything, guys. There is nothing wrong with cooking European, modern, molecular gastronomy. They're all great. There's only one problem, which is, when are we going to actually cook our real food? That's all. Just have one singular representation of our real food, and somewhere that's been missing from the entire market. So what we brought in was regionality and the simplicity to cook it.
You're an Indian from India, not a second generation immigrant brought up in the United States. You weren't born there. I don't know about Chintan, but I assume because he also worked in India, he's an Indian who went to America. Now, when I look at people who were born and brought up in the United States and people in the UK, I'm always intrigued by their attitude to Indian food. You talk to any restaurateur in the UK and you say, what's it like? And they'll say, it's terrible, you can't find any chefs because the government won't give us visas. And you say, but hang on, there are millions of Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis here. Why do you still need to get chefs from India? And the short answer is that none of those kids want to cook Indian food. Is that a problem in America as well?
Oh, without a doubt. I think, staffing, finding the right talent has been immensely difficult. And it's not, post-COVID, it's even worse. It's not just that I don't want to cook Indian food, it's also what type of Indian food, right? So there's this stigma attached to Indian food that looks Indian. We never talk about it. We never actually acknowledge any of these, but they're right in front of us. When a bowl of gravy, take aloo posto, take whatever it is that you want, all of a sudden looks like its basic form, we feel we're demeaning ourselves by putting that. Right? And I think when you're outside of India, and that has created a real challenge. Even today, you would think after the kind of success that the group has seen, you would have hordes of Indians who are going to just come up and say, I want to work there. Yes, it is happening much more than ever before, but not enough. And I think we still have long ways to go.
Because I was trying to think, there are a lot of celebrity Indian chefs in the UK, people who've got Michelin stars, but every single one of them has come from India. There's hardly anyone I can think of who's like a second generation Indian who grew up in Birmingham or Bradford or somewhere and said, let me open a restaurant, let me be adventurous, let me serve the food we ate at home. There are chefs, there are Michelin-starred Indian chefs, but they serve Western food, people who've grown up over there. So there is still that stigma, isn't it?
A lot. We just did a project in Miami, and it was around immersive gastronomy. It's a whole different project with like virtual reality technology, the whole intersection of it that we were working on. And there's one specific chef we brought on who was born in the United States. Father is Indian. And I remember hearing, he said his mom was not Indian. When he tried to cook Indian food as he was growing up, she says, don't do that at home. Just don't do that. I don't think she's a bad person. I just think somewhere that she didn't find any value in it. And the truth is, value is not found. Sometimes value is created, which I think somewhere we're living through. We're always seeking to replicate what someone else has found value in. What we're not always doing is we're not creating our own little spaces so that it creates a sense of value for many others. And I think that's the short-sightedness sometimes that comes in.
But so much of it also is us not understanding our guests. If you go to London, it's slightly less now. All the restaurants that got Michelin stars that were Indian and people raved about, all of them plated their food. All of them Frenchified the presentation because they thought that was the way to go. In fact, people are most willing to try anything new or different. In a sense, they underestimate their customers.
Someone asked me, they said, my God, what a success you've had. I think the trick was plating, wasn't it? and I remember hearing this, and I said, if there's one thing we're not doing, we're not plating anything. We actually are serving you things on, there's a venison that we serve in Sema. The champaran meat, as some of you know from Bihar, is cooked and served in a clay pot. And we're currently in talks with the supplier to see if we can customize it to really understand what that temperature would be like to be as real as possible. And I remember even this conversation. Typical champaran meat from Bihar comes with a whole head of garlic, not a few confit garlic. Confit, all the funny words. And I remember us talking about that moment. We're saying, does this make sense? People are going to open this bowl and they're going to actually find an entire head of garlic. And you said, that's the way. Believe it or not, it's the best-selling dish in a place like New York, in a restaurant that no one can get into. So this idea that we always go back to, I think can be dispelled.
If you were to advise people who are opening restaurants now, young Indians, in India, let's forget about New York, because I think people get it wrong in India as well, what would you tell them?
I think you have to understand your market. I think it's important to understand. You don't have to play to your market, but you need to understand your market. Remember, I think one of the biggest mistakes people do is they show up to New York with a lot of money from India, and I've seen this over and over, and they create something that they believe every Indian wants. But that's what every Indian in India wants. That's not every Indian that's been living abroad for 45 years in America is actually asking for. And I think these are misconceptions. So understand your market. And number two, have a clear perspective. I still to this day, and that's something I will never understand, what a multi-cuisine restaurant really means. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think it works. The economics of it makes complete sense. It's just the most important thing is how can if we have struggled creating 20 dishes from scratch well, how can I do 60 of them? How can I do justice to any single one of them? And I think even in India, even right now, the hyper-focus, the kind of regionality, the kind of integrity that one needs towards ingredients is somewhere wavering. And I think we try to fix that by plating in many ways. Look at it, make it look exciting, Instagrammable, and I think it works. I think it's actually the opposite. And I think we have it wrong for the next generation in many ways. Someone asked me, they're like, looks like you haven't figured out what this generation wants. I said, I don't have it figured out. I am the next generation. I don't know, so therefore I don't sit at home and try to predict what this next generation is looking for. It's me, and I think in many ways, our voice ended up reflecting what this next generation is, and what we're seeking is truth. What we're not seeking is don't sugarcoat it, don't package it for me, but give me something real. Give me something that has a sense of vulnerability. And I think to be able to express that through food in any part of the world, I think has some potential.
Is it fair to say that one of your messages is that your food must have integrity? It must be food that you made because that's how it's made in, say, Bihar or wherever. That's how you enjoy it, and that's how you think it should be made, not because that's how you think our customer's going to like it.
It's like a piece of art. Do you think Van Gogh was sitting there and thinking, let's do this because the customers are going to really show up? It's the same thing, guys. It's anybody, you're in films, ask how many commercial projects happen out there. And somewhere, it goes beyond food. Each time you are trying to read the customer's mind, you're getting it wrong. Because the one mind you're not reading is yourself. And I think the most important factor is somewhere to just honor who you are. Because I think what people really want is to get to know you. Is to get to know your perspective. Sometimes it's good, it comes with a huge risk. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it doesn't. What I have learned, people are not showing up. I was just telling him this earlier. I thought people will just show up to one restaurant, and that'll be the end of it. Next restaurant, maybe they won't. But I realized people were not showing up for a restaurant. They were showing up for a cause. And the cause could be expressed in so many different ways. There's an Indian elderly gentleman who sat at the restaurant at the end of the meal and tells me, I've had Indian food my entire life, but this is the first time you gave me a reason to fight for it. And I think it's a really powerful statement. What is that? What is that fight? And how can we find that in each other? I think that's what brings us all together.
I'm going to throw this open to questions, but before that, one last question. Why do you have a cocktail called Moon Sen?
First of all, she is a legend, that's why. But the truth is, I wasn't even the one. I should not take credit for it. Her name is Lucia. She's a Mexican bartender who came up with the entire cocktail program at Masala Wala and Sons, which is serving Bengali food in New York. And she did her entire research on Bengal and Pachforon and all of these things we started talking about. And she created a vodka cocktail. And she comes up, I'm looking at the name, she's like, I want to name this Moon Sen. I said, why? What's the purpose? She's like, I've looked at her pictures, I've seen some of her clips, and I think this cocktail is the perfect embodiment of who she is. So, there you go. That's the reason.
And it's a strong cocktail?
I hope